Adventures in Logistics. Ryan and I are going to take a little bit of break of the training today, and we're going to share some stories that really, truly, well, kind of directed our life or told us, yeah, you probably shouldn't do that again. All right, so Ryan, I figured, you know what, we're leading up to U.S. Thanksgiving, right? Where people are starting to wind down the year, if you will. So I figured, we'd kind of have some fun today instead of like a serious training day and like everybody report back what happened and all this kind of stuff. So um, my first story for this is if you have a very, very, very important meeting, um, be very cautious about what you're doing prior to the meeting. And some of you might say, well, Dan, that's kind of, normal, but here's what I mean by that. So just before I left corporate, I had one of the biggest meetings of my life. And I'm on my way out the door and you're timing everything, right? And you're like,
Mhm.
okay, well, it takes me like an hour to get there. So I'm going to leave an hour and 20 minutes, give yourself 20-minute leeway. I could do this. So I decided I'm going to let the dogs out at a specific time. And I said, it's going to work. Well, actually the dog. So I let Stanley out and he gets sprayed by a skunk. And now I'm in this pickle, Ryan, because I've got to leave in like 20 minutes to get there in the time that I want to get there. And my dog's now smells like a skunk. And it was one of the greatest eye-opening experiences because, of course, now all day I'm smelling skunk, thinking I smell like skunk, right? So there's all these things going on in your mind. And I realized from that point forward, so this is going back probably 2018, I guess, because we had just gotten Stanley. And so this brings me to my first point is always plan or reserve time for things going wrong.
Mhm.
And so what I do now is I let the dogs out like an hour and a half early. Not that, it's the first and only time, but it's still it's these things where sometimes these things come into play that take us for a loop. And when my dog got sprayed by a skunk, it took me for a huge loop because now I'm in the garage, not coming in the house. I'm the one dealing with it. You got him on a chain, you're trying to wash him, and you're trying to get out the door to get to literally one of the biggest meetings of my life. When we were taking a customer and turning it into a 5-star customer. So like this meeting was, 4,700 international shipments a year, almost 1 million square feet of warehouse space. Like it was a big deal. And I'm about to totally blow it because I let my dog out and never, I don't know how many, Ryan, or if you do. Do you ever like even think about the what ifs? And from that point forward, I started really thinking, okay, so if I got to go at 8, I'm going to let the dogs out at like 7, just to make sure that there's no issue with them coming back in. So that's my first one. Be prepared. What about you?
Be prepared. Be prepared. That's a good one. That's a good one. Let's see. Like, kind of put me on the spot here. So let's just talk a little bit about that too. In terms of like what if, I don't know, I'm pretty structured in terms of like if I gotta go to a meeting and stuff like that. So like you said, with like 7 a.m., like let them go out. If you got to be at a meeting for 8 o'clock, let them out at 7. They've got their daily routine. I actually plan my meetings around my own schedule, if that makes sense. So
Oh,
if
makes
it's
sense.
like I know what I'm gonna be doing, like I wake up at like 5 o'clock and have meetings. I kind of done that. And one thing, it's funny that you bring that up because I thought last week, because my calendar has been crazy with like bookings and stuff like that, whether it be for the show, whether it be for other stuff that I'm doing, and then things like that. So I've actually moved all my meetings, that especially for brand new meetings, stuff like that, just to Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 4 p.m. So
Yes.
I've given myself that structure of like, not everybody can have access to me anymore. And if you really want access to me, you're gonna have to book like one of those days, like from Tuesdays and Thursdays. In terms of, let's see, my let's go with first. So my first time, let's go with this one. My first commission paycheck. That was pretty funny. So that's when I realized that I hate the government and I hate taxes. But anyways, so a little mindset for everybody. A little preface by here is that the place that I worked at first, they were basically you make minimum wage until you hit like a certain threshold. So the threshold was that you have to do 5 grand in GP, and that was the threshold to start making commissions. And I like, even up until this point, and I hate to say this, but like this company, I'm an agent, it's different now, but this company was pretty cool in terms of how they did base plus commission. So they'd always pay your base 1 week, and then the next week, Dan, would always be your commission, and your commission was always like in for like 2 weeks. So basically, you were getting paid 3 months, 3 times a month, right? So you get your base pay for the 2 weeks, then your commission, and then you get your base pay the next 2 weeks, right? So what I
That's
really
actually a pretty interesting structure.
it
Yeah.
was amazing, man. So that's why when I went to other places, I'm like, wait a minute, we gotta wait like 2-3 months for this. Like, I'll be an agent, I get paid for what I do that previous month, right? But anyways, so it was kind of cool because like my boss pulled me into his office, and it was a whole thing, right? He's like, okay, Ryan, we finally you finally did it, and here we are, and here's the form and all that stuff, and then he told me what my commission was gonna be, and mind you, I was at 5 grand GP already, so I didn't know. I was obviously like counting like the paychecks. I'm like, okay, cool. Like me and my ex, we're gonna go ball out. I'm gonna look into some new things, and it's just a progression of life. And then when he gave me that first check, and then the commissions with taxes on there, I'm like, the first thing I texted my ex girlfriend was like, so the keg maybe not, but
Yeah, we're not balling as much as we thought.
yeah, McDonald's, we got that 2 can dine for $9.99. So that was a pretty funny story to understand that, taxes and how everything worked, because up until that point, I never worked in a role where I got commissions. It was always going to be a salary, so I was kind of knew what to expect and what to budget and all that things. But I did that for what I think 8 months, and that was so much fun, man. Like getting paid like almost every single week, right? Because you got your 2 weeks and things like that. But yeah, my first story of getting my first commission check, it's always going to be actually it's like if I turn my camera, it's actually on my a lot of things that I like are my first. I always kind of like frame it and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Hence, even my
sweet.
first non-compete threatening letter that I got. But I'm not
Oh,
gonna get into that. But that
the
is on the wall as
non-compete
well.
threatening letter.
Yes. So
Yes,
yeah,
that's a story for another day. But yes, that's a good one to laminate and hang. I laminate and hung my first letter where I got fired.
there we go.
I
Yeah.
actually was on my way into the company because it was my birthday, and I was like, "Oh my god, they're gonna do a cake for me." I was telling my wife, "Oh my god, they're gonna do a cake for me. They're gonna do a cake for me." They called me into the office on my birthday. I go, "I know, I'd like it's a cake." I walked in and they hand me walking papers, and it's on my birthday. And I'm like, and the guy goes, "You got anything to say?" I go, "I thought you were gonna get me a cake." He goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "It's my birthday." He's like, "Oh," and I'm like,
Someone didn't clear this with HR.
"No, no, 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 no." So that's hilarious. So for me, the second lesson I learned very early on in my career, within the first 5 years. Always double check where you're going to make sure you have all the credentials to do what you need to do.
Mhm.
And some people are probably like, that's pretty cryptic. So here's the story. I'm 19 years old. I'm on my way to Jersey to meet a customer. I have a hotel booked. Like we had a person at the company that would like schedule all this stuff. Had a car booked and everything. So I have meetings plans with my customer. Plus, I have meetings with like a few other customers in that area. Land at the airport. Land in Newark. Go to the car rental agency. Hand them my thing. They look at me. They go, "You can't rent a car." I go, "Why?" They go, "You're not 21." I'm like, "What?" They go, "Yeah, in the U.S., you got to be 21 to rent a car. You're 19 years old. You're not eligible." And I went, "Oh." So I ended up calling my customer, and he comes to pick me up at the airport, and he ended up driving me around for like 4 days because I didn't have a car and I couldn't get to my meetings. And Bobby and I are still great friends today because of it. It actually was a so I get in the car and he goes, "Okay, so let me understand this." He goes, "You effing child. I got to drive your ass around for 4 days because you're not old enough to rent a car." I'm like, "No." He goes, "Fuck that, borrow my car." I'm like, "Sure, if I can." So then he did a little research and he realized like if I got in an accident, he's not covered. He's like, "You're not touching my car." So my customer actually ended up driving me around for 4 days because I had no idea how old you had to. I figured I can rent a car in Canada. Why can't I rent a car in the U.S.? So, for any of you that are younger traveling, just make sure you're old enough to do what you need to do, because he still bugs me about it today. And you know what? It ended out being okay. Like, it ended up being awesome. But you think, right? You land in Jersey, your flight's not for 4 or 5 days. Like, everything's 45 minutes an hour away. It's like, what do you mean I have no car? Now, you know what I mean? So you think of the logistics that would have had to have happened over the next 4 days. Like, at that point, they didn't have Uber. There was no Ubers. It was like literally taxi cabs. And yeah, so I was pretty thrown back. And then the next time I went to Jersey, we my VP and I go to Jersey. So I've covered the car rental thing. Didn't learn the full lesson, but I covered the car rental thing. We land. He's like, "Okay, where's the hotel?" I'm like, "What do you mean? Didn't you book the hotel?" He's like, "Why would I book the hotel? I'm coming on a sales trip with you." And I'm like, "Oh." So now we are searching, Ryan, to find a hotel everywhere. And there just happens to be like 4 conventions in town. There's no hotels anywhere. We literally find a motel in the middle of the ghetto in Jersey. Beside the motel is like a scrap yard, and on the other side is a metal fabricating company. Like, this motel, literally, you go up to the door handle and it like jiggles as if it's about to fall off. You go in the room. Let's just say my socks never came off. I slept in my clothes. I tied a t-shirt around my head because I was like, it was the nastiest of nasty. There's drawings on the walls, and we put a chair up underneath the door. Um, the guy I was with taped the phone to his hand, and that's when. So for all of you, it's not like these phones. We're talking the old school phones like this with the dial, with the rotary dial. Like, he literally taped the whole 8-pound phone to his hand. I slept with one of our one of our coffee mugs that we were going to give to a customer. I slept with that in my hand, just worried about somebody coming in and like slamming down the door. Brother, it was crazy. Like, you would not stay there with your buddies when you're 18. You'd probably rather sleep in a park. That's how bad it was. And we were there. It was crazy, man. That's probably my number 2. What about you?
Yeah, number 2. Yeah, well, first and foremost, I want to acknowledge that because, like, I've always assumed that, like, whoever's more
I was,
senior, they kind of book the trips and all that stuff, like, they book the hotels, they book everything, right? And it's just like,
yeah, it was a little
unless you spring
reverse.
it on them, you spring it on them and be like, hey, like, I'm going to something like today or whatever, something like that. So, yeah, I don't know. The VP should definitely book that for you.
Well, he didn't do very much. I mean, he was the type of VP that said, my remote control for my TV, which is his computer, isn't working. So he kicked the computer and said, "Oh, okay, it's working now." Like, that was his. Yeah. So he wasn't. Yeah. He's a unique individual, and for anyone that knows who I'm talking about, you'll know he's a very unique individual, Ryan. That's for sure.
All right, there we go. Like, for me, I don't really have too much of these like adventure or like comedy ones because I feel like my career's kind of just been, kind of move with it. But I want to find some. I want to unlock the 6 years
That's
of knowledge.
boring.
Well, no, it's hey man, like I said, but it's me of being. All right, fuck it. Let's go with the story. So wait. Yeah, so the power of actual thinking outside of the box. So I had a story where I had a good friend of mine. She was an editor at a construction magazine. So one day we talked like every day, and one day she was talking about this one new customer that was coming on. They invited her to like come to like their office, and they're all a bunch of party people and all that stuff. And when she said the name, I laughed because it was actually a company that I was prospecting. I'll say it out here, Creighton Rock and Drill, out in Mississauga, Ontario. So anyway, so she hung out with those guys, and I'm like, oh, yo, I do a little bit of business, but not too much with them. So anyways, I was like, what other customers do you have like that are a part of like this newsletter? No, they do a magazine every single month. So they do a magazine strategically for construction customers. And I was like, started telling me the names, and then I started dreaming. I was like, I'd love to work with these people. So I'm like, what is the next step? And she was like, why don't you do an ad in our magazine? And I was like, an ad in your magazine? Fuck it, let's do it. So I did an ad in their magazine, and we got the editor. I couldn't decide on like what to do, and actually, like I said, I actually still have that magazine. And this was this was 4.5 years ago.
Frame it,
And
buddy. Frame
yeah,
it.
and I did it. And then you know what? Actually, I'll be full transparent with you, Dan. No calls, no inbound leads. But every time I would call one of those customers, hey guys, you guys got your new the new magazine for thing, and they'd be like, how'd you know? I'd be like, okay, yeah, just go to page 144 out of 148 because I was brand new. I was on the back, right? And they're like, oh, okay, what do you want? And I was like, well, I'd love to get some shipments going with you guys or see what you guys are doing, like what's going on. So it did actually land me quite a bunch of good conversations. And I think we landed 3 customers from it. But that was the one thing of like thinking outside the box in logistics, because at that point, video wasn't a thing for sure. It was the old school way, like phone calls, emails, going to meet clients was a big one, and things like that. But yeah, it was just like, for me, it was like, okay, let me think outside the box. Let me try something completely brand new. And it's helped me. It's helped me a lot. So everybody who's kind of watching out there, you just never know. I've seen some SaaS guys, they'll send like a box of donuts with like a one half-eaten donut left. And it was just like, hey, this box could have been full if you answered my phone call, and then the next week when they did
Oh.
answer it, or somebody would be like, a crumpled up business card or a crumpled up resume, and send that to them and be like, hey, this is probably what you want to do anyways, right? And just things to kind of like challenge it and have a little bit of fun, right? So yeah, for everybody out there, yeah, think outside the box, because you just never know what the ROI can be.
I love that. So when I was doing a lot of driving into industrial areas and just going from company to company to company, um, I got my printer buddy of mine to make me business cards that were like this big, to make me business cards that were 3 feet by 2 feet, and to make me business cards that were literally smaller than this. And I had all 3 sizes, Ryan. And so these massive 3 foot ones were in my back seat. And it was like, I don't know, I think it was like 12 mil stock. So it's almost like that thick piece of cardboard. And
Yeah.
he laminated them and everything. Like they looked just like a business card, just like on steroids, oversized. And I used to walk into these industrial areas and just walk right in and say, who might the traffic manager be here? And they're like, well, who's speaking? I go, well, it's, Dan from this company. And they're like, well, he's not around. Can you leave me a card? And so I would leave like a card like this, and you'd literally need a magnifying glass to see it. I'd hand them the card, and, and the people behind the desk would look at me and they'd be like, "What?" Like, and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I go, if we do business, I can afford to give them a bigger card, and they'd start laughing, right? And that was kind of like the joke. And then a couple of times they're like, "Do you have a business card?" I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll be right back." And the first time I brought in this like 3 by 2 or 4 by 3, it was huge card, and I bring it in and I put it on the floor, and the woman goes, "Oh, we got to get Frank up here because he's going to love this." And Frank was the traffic manager. So she actually called and said, "Listen, there's a dude here. I told him to leave a car, but you got to see this." So he comes out and I hand him this. It was almost like those clearinghouse checks, when they're standing in front of their door and they got the big check from like the 649. And Frank started laughing. And it ended up being like a wicked client of mine because of it. So, like that whole think outside the box, it goes to a whole new levels. I mean, I remember at one point, I don't know if you remember this, but they were like almost like CDs, but they were about this big and they were business cards.
Hmm.
And somebody would actually have to put it in their computer. And we thought, oh, this is super cool. People are going to love it. It's just like 9 extra steps to get your business information. It was totally useless in the end, but it was a super cool thing. So it was like a disc that was like maybe this big, and it was like half the size of a CD, and it was your business card. And literally, I would carry stacks of them around, Ryan, and just hand them out. And I'm sure 99.9% of them went in the trash, because who wants to put something in their computer to then turn around, upload it onto the screen to get my contact details, right? The other guy that just had his card on the end of the table, or the pad with the thing on it, with the number on it, would be way better. But I remember that in thinking outside the box, and it was actually my buddy Brent who gave me that idea, because I was like, I want something different
Yeah.
as a business card. He goes, well, then do this. And then he goes, like, I make really small ones. So like people are literally doing this to look at it. He goes, and then at least they'll remember you. And so that was actually, I had a lot of fun walking into companies, because it was always like, and even when I would give ones this big,
Hmm.
right, which is like 8.5 by 14. It's like legal size, kind of like a legal size paper. That was fun too, because it would always be like a, what the hell? Like you're pulling this massive thing out of your bag and you're handing it. It was super cool, man. Yeah, super cool. I loved it. I loved it. That's one thing about the ability to walk into places. I mean, I remember going into Ohio, and my VP and I were in, and this company was a solar blanket company for pools. And we sit down, and you can tell this woman had a reign on the warehouse and shipping department. Like when she would walk in, everybody would turn around and be like, you know, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. And I remember asking her one time, Ryan, going, what is your title? And she says, my title is it. I said, it. She says, yeah, it's it. I do everything. I'm it. And I'm like, oh, okay. Do you have a business card? She goes, no. And I'm like, okay, right on. But yeah, just meeting the type of people I've met in my years is incredible, because you meet all sorts of different people.
Yeah, you really do. I think that's, well, I think that's with any industry, but I think with this one, with logistics specifically, you get the ones who are the old, I always like the older ones because they're always so funny to me, because they always want to give like share their stories, or kind of go from there. I think nowadays it's more new age people going into it. It's like they're going to university, they're going to college into this.
Mm.
So they're actually like going through the process of like, hey, I do want to become logistics managers. But the ones who are just kind of like roped into it, or like kind of like, hey, let me move into this role, as your camera is going off. See, there we go. Always be prepared. Always have a backup camera. He's not doing the thumbs today, but
I'm telling you, this is crazy. You know, oh, that's why. All right, for the rest of this, Ryan, I think my camera's out. So, but you know what? I just tested this, and it went for like 55 minutes. And now I just do it again, and it shuts off after this time. I don't understand it. But anyway, so what is your if you were to say like one final story in your logistics career that you think about quite often, what would it be?
sorry, repeat that again, brother.
If you have one story in your logistics career that you think about quite often, like more often than the others, what would it be?
Oh, that lives rent free in my mind.
Mm.
Uh, I don't know. I think though the number one thing for me that I always kind of reflect a little bit on is kind of like my journey, especially the way that I've kind of landed like where I'm at right now. That's that's definitely the story for me, because it truly it truly shows that everything does happen for a reason. You just never know. So the one that I always think about, like one of my good friends and I consider him like a brother. He's my lead ops guy, Ray. Um, I was hired at a company, I left to go to another company, and I went from cradle to the grave to full to just half cycle sales. And I find out that Ray was actually hired 2 weeks prior to me. And then when we kind of became like really good friends, and this is like nonchalantly, like we just became like really good friends and we started talking, we kind of put the pieces together that we were actually kind of hired to work together. And it was kind of funny that we talked about. We were like, of course, the two brown guys they hire, they're gonna want them to work together. But he had my back through everything at that first company. I had his back, and we just got a great relationship together. And then when he did leave, I waited a couple months and things like that to see how things were over. And he's like, "Hey man, hey, if you're ever looking to kind of go somewhere, let me know." I was like, "Actually, you know what? Business has actually kind of sucked since you left. Like, what's up?" And then um, when I went to go meet the owner of the company, have a meeting with them and get to know the company and stuff like that, I found out that day specifically at the current company I worked at, they fired two people, two sales reps. And why that is important is that office alone had only four total sales reps. So literally 50% of your staff is gone while I'm taking an interview for another company. So I'm already gone. And just kind of seeing that trajectory of it, and I think like Ray and I, he's a branch manager at the company that I work with now. And just kind of like the conversation, something like honestly, sometimes when we go out for beers or go out for drinks and we just kind of just reflect on the whole journey of like fuck, man, you and I like became like really close like 5 years ago, and look where we're at and like things that we're doing. And I think next year I'm fucking excited to kind of see what we kind of happen, because we'll be doing a lot more freight, a lot more free shipments, and things like that. So that's the one store I think that lives rent free. It's just like nothing happens by chance, you know. So and just like with Ray and the people that we met and things like that, is it's just wild.
That's a good one, brother. For me, it would be um, so the first time I saw my freight in a store. So and I'm sure we've talked about this about the
Yeah, did you
wrapping
call them, by the
paper.
way? You're supposed to call your first
Yes,
customer.
I
I called.
did. Yes, I
Yeah.
did. Yes, I did. And I'll tell you about that on Thursday, I think, when I called two of them actually. So,
Mhm.
and actually it was one of the best things I could have done. But so um and I remember getting back to the office and telling a colleague of mine at that point. This guy was like heavy. He was one of the first guys I ever saw to make $1 million a year GP. And so I was telling him, I was like, you know what, this is crazy, man. Like I walked in the store and they did it and they were there, and I was so excited. He goes, dude, do you want to see something that'll blow your mind? And I said, yeah. He goes, all right, come with me. So he worked with Bombardier at that point. So we go up to Mirabel. This is when I was still in Saint Laurent, so in Quebec. So we go up to Mirabel, where Bell Helicopter Textron is,
Mhm.
and we come into this airport, and there's an Antonov sitting on the runway. And Ryan, you think you've seen big planes before until you've seen an Antonov. This plane was like a floating city. It was like the friggin' Avengers ship that you know what I mean. And I was staring at this thing and my jaw was dropping. He goes, you want to see something even cooler? He goes, you deal with Bell Helicopter, right? So at that point, I was working with Bell Helicopter Textron. And I said, yeah. He says, okay, so check this out. And so we get in this little like, best thing I could describe it is kind of like a go-kart thing. And we go around and they're actually around the plane. So we're coming in from the back end of the plane and the nose is up in the air and they're loading helicopters into this plane. And Ryan, you could see it on YouTube, you could see it, but when you're standing there in person, and this is probably this time, and when I was in New York on a private yacht in front of the Statue of Liberty on the Hudson, are probably the only two times prior to smartphones where I wish I would have had a smartphone
Mm.
because I didn't document it. And I wish, I would go back right now, go back to that point and wish I could have taken pictures because that would have been super cool. Like me standing in front of an Antonov while they're loading a plane as a picture on your wall, like just those kind of really cool moments. So for me, it was that realization that there's always a higher level in logistics to see something cooler.
Mm.
And like watching these helicopters being loaded and then getting put on rollers and getting rolled across the Antonov and like being able to stack two helicopters deep in this plane. I'm like, how on God's green earth does this thing get off the ground? And then not only that, speaking to some of the guys on scene, I'm like, so the guy goes, I go, so why are the engines running? So the engines were still running. And the guy
Mhm.
says, well, it costs 10 grand to start the engines. It's cheaper to keep the engines running. And I'm like, really? Like, yeah. And so, I mean, I don't know how accurate that information is, but it was just like standing in the middle of this. It's almost like the Mirabel Airport. It's almost like a cornfield with a couple of runway strips in it, right? It's nothing like Pearson or anything like that. And standing there, Ryan, watching this monstrosity of a plane, and then standing back inside the building while the thing took off and looking at it and just going, there is no way in hell this thing is getting off the ground. Like its wings flap. Like it's so big. You know how like rigid usual airplane wings are. Like the
Mhm.
Antonov wings look like they were flapping when the thing is going down the runway. I'm like, this thing is not gonna fly. And one of the coolest experiences of my life was standing there listening to this plane. Like we were literally a couple of 100 feet from the thing taking off. Like the sound is astronomical. The size of this thing is astronomical. And those two things really hooked me into this industry for life.
Mhm. That is such a crazy story, and even like visually, like even when you're saying it, it's probably not even as close to even imagining what it actually is, right? So that's
Oh
amazing.
no.
Yeah, it's pretty
Like
cool, buddy.
insane, Ryan. Insane. Like, and the thing is, you can go on YouTube, and I've done it many times, gone on YouTube and said, "Oh yeah, I did it," and it's like you're looking at, you're like, "Yeah, just doesn't do it justice." It's like going up the CN Tower or standing on the edge of it looking down. Two completely different experiences, right?
Yeah, that is wild. Yeah, yeah, it's completely wild.
Yeah.
It just makes you appreciate like everything that's out there, you know, like the concrete
Yes.
jungle, all that fun stuff from there. So,
Yes.
yeah, you got me thinking, man. Like you mentioned at the beginning, man, I'm hungry for turkey now. Turkey days in what, 10 days now? So
10 days, buddy.
10 days, brother.
10
All right.
days. Rock and roll.